It's been 4 years since this happened, but I remember it as vividly as if it happened last night. Sometimes, when that woman's grotesque face appears in my dreams, I wake up screaming. Even now, as I type this out, goosebumps crawl across my skin and a cold sweat trickles down my back. It was mid-June on a rainy evening. You know those days when the sky never really brightens and the rain just keeps falling, like the world's holding its breath? Yeah, it was one of those days. I was on the veranda, rushing to bring in the laundry before the storm got worse. That's when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head. There was a woman standing at the end of the driveway, just in front of my house. At first glance, it looked like she had no head. A short, involuntary scream escaped me. Not loud, just a startled, breathless noise. But when I focused, I realized the truth was somehow even worse. Her head wasn't missing, it was just tilted all the way back. So far back, it looked unnatural, like her head was broken. And her mouth was wide open. She didn't move, she didn't speak. She just stood there, facing the sky. The only sound was the rain. I stood frozen for a full minute, watching her. She never looked at me, never shifted, not even a twitch. I felt cold fear drip down my spine. Something in me knew, don't provoke her. So I quietly continued gathering the laundry, moving as softly as I could. I started walking toward the front door. That's when she snapped her head toward me. My heart stopped. Her face was lit up with this unbelievably joyful expression, but it wasn't normal. It looked stuck, almost like a mask. People smile, and then their face returns to neutral, but hers didn't. She just kept smiling, wide, unblinking, unmoving. It was a smile I can't even begin to describe, the most joyful, most horrifying expression I've ever seen on a human face. Something inside me said, she's not right, she's not safe. But I didn't say a word, I didn't make a sound. I ran. I bolted for the front door, yanked it open, dashed inside, and slammed it shut behind me. Click, I locked it. 3 seconds later, there was a massive bang against the door. I screamed and dropped everything. The laundry scattered everywhere. I collapsed to the floor.
What are you doing?
I screamed. My voice sounded like a terrified child's, but there was no answer, just silence. I remember thinking, how did she get here so fast? I had just shut the door, just seconds ago, and somehow she had reached it and slammed into it with terrifying force. It sounded like a body slam, not just a knock.
I'm calling the police!
I shouted. Still silence. I crept to the window and peeked outside. She was back in the driveway, standing exactly where she had been before. Head still tilted back, face still grinning at the sky. Every now and then, she would twist her body like she was celebrating some private joy. I called the police. They arrived not long after, and they arrested her. I remember one of the officers asking me if I was okay, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Her face, it was bleeding. Blood was dripping from her nose and forehead. That's when I realized she had slammed her face into my front door. But even with the blood, she was still smiling. I never heard what happened to her. The police never followed up with me. They just took her away. Maybe she was mentally ill. Maybe she was high. I don't know. But I still don't understand why she ran at me like that. And I can't stop thinking, if I hadn't shut that door in time, she would have slammed right into me. I think about that moment every time it rains. I'm currently a 16-year-old living in Nepal. Even though this happened years ago, I still remember it clearly, and it's affected me ever since. This story goes back to when I was around 6 years old, and my mom was pregnant with my younger brother. Even though I preferred sleeping next to her, I was often made to sleep with my aunt instead. One night, I threw a tantrum, begging to stay with my mom. She said no. Frustrated and angry, I stormed through the house, turning off every light. But the second the darkness took over, fear kicked in. I panicked and rushed to turn them all back on. Still upset, I quietly walked to my aunt's room and laid down to sleep. I always slept at the edge of the bed, facing the wall, to avoid falling. The bed was covered with a mosquito net. As I curled up, the room was dim, not pitch black, because light from the corridor leaked in through the open door. That's how I saw her, a woman who looked exactly like my mother, standing, unmoving, against the wall. She wasn't doing anything, just standing, as if she were frozen. Her eyes were wide, her pupils fixed directly on me. There was no emotion on her face, none. But her stare was cold and intense. She was wearing my mom's brown kurta. Her stillness was unnatural, her skin pale and doll-like. The air around me grew colder and goosebumps spread across my arms. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it. I shut my eyes tight, telling myself it was just my imagination. But when I opened them again, she was still there, unmoving, watching. Tears welled in my eyes. I turned toward my aunt, trying not to sob, wishing the night would just end. The next morning, I asked my mom,
"Were you in my room last night?"
She looked confused.
"I wasn't,"
she said. I told her everything. Her expression changed. She looked worried. Then she rushed to where her laundry was soaking in detergent, pulling out a piece of clothing.
"Was it this, Kurtha?"
She asked. I nodded. That was the one. Here's what still gives me chills, even now. There was never enough space between the bed and the wall. Not enough to stand in, not for a person, let alone a grown, pregnant woman. And yet, she had been there, watching me. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw that night, but I've never forgotten her. This happened about 9 months ago, in late winter. I usually get up at 6 a.m. for school, and my older sister, who's 26, drives me on her way to work. It's part of our routine. She's always well put together, her hair curled, makeup flawless, and dressed professionally. But that Thursday morning was different. I woke up a bit late, rushed to get ready, and ran downstairs expecting her to be annoyed or honking outside. Instead, she was standing in the entryway, waiting for me. She looked off. Her hair wasn't curled, her face was bare, no makeup at all, and she had baggy clothes on. I tried to lighten the mood.
"Going to work ugly today?"
I joked. She turned to me slowly and smiled, but not like she found it funny. It was too wide, almost like she was stretching her face into a grin. Her eyes looked just a bit too open, too fixed. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to say something. She didn't. Just kept smiling like that. It made the room feel colder, so I asked,
"Are you driving me to school or not?"
That's when her face dropped. The smile vanished instantly. She grabbed my hand and said,
"I'll walk you instead."
I blinked.
"Why?"
I asked. She didn't answer, but her grip tightened. It almost hurt. She was squeezing my hand so tightly, I almost let out a sound. It felt like she had the strength of a bodybuilder, which made no sense. My sister's skinny and not particularly strong. We started walking in complete silence. Every time I tried to ask her why we weren't using the car, she ignored me and just kept walking, eyes forward, her face blank. When we got close to the school, I finally yanked my hand away.
"We're here."
I said, already walking toward the gates, but she kept insisting that I follow her.
"Just come this way."
She kept repeating.
"Just follow me."
I ran inside the school instead. I told my friends how weird she was acting. They all looked at each other, concerned, but didn't say anything. I figured they just thought I was being dramatic. Later, during break, I checked my phone, and that's when I froze. There was a text from my sister, sent at exactly 6 a.m., and it said,
Heading out early today. Got a meeting. Sorry.
Attached to the message was a photo of her sitting in her car, doing a peace sign. Her hair was curled, makeup done perfectly, and dressed professionally. The caption?
Have fun walking to school alone.
I felt the blood drain from my face. If she had already left, then who the hell walked me to school? I told everyone what happened. Most didn't believe me. They laughed, said I must have imagined it. Except my mom. When I told her, she got quiet. Then she said something that sent chills down my spine.
I've had something like that happen to me before.
She wouldn't give me details, but I remember the words she used. Doppelganger. Since then, I've been paranoid. Sometimes I wonder, is my mother really my mother? Is my father really my father? Every time I see my sister without makeup, with her hair down, I freeze. I can't help but remember that morning. The way she looked at me, the way she smiled, the way she held my hand, and the way she said,
Just follow me.
This is a terrifying story that happened to my mom's friend years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. Back when I was still in my mother's womb, her friend Tanya was known for her radiant personality and beautiful long black hair. She lived close to a big towering tree where crows often made their nests. Every afternoon when it was time to eat, Tanya would sit by her open window, enjoying her meal as the hot summer breeze drifted in. But one day, something changed. A crow landed on the windowsill and just watched her. Its eyes locked onto hers, unmoving. She thought it was hungry, so she started feeding it, and that turned into something she did every day. At first, it seemed harmless, but one evening, things took a strange turn. Tanya had just showered, and the heat was so intense that she left her hair wet and hanging loose down her back. There were only 4 people in the house that night: Tanya, her cousin, her brother, and his friend. Her parents were out of town for surgery. That night, she ate dinner, but her hunger was insatiable. It was like she hadn't eaten in days. The next day, she was bedridden with a burning fever, and when it finally broke, things got worse. Tanya began eating massive amounts of food, enough for several people, and at night, that's when the real horror began. She started roaming the house, opening the refrigerator, smashing bottles, dragging chairs, knocking on walls. It was as if she wasn't in control anymore. The doctors called it sleepwalking, but her family knew better. Then one day, my mother went to visit. What she saw was burned into her memory. 7 or 8 people were inside Tanya's bedroom, desperately trying to hold her down. She was thrashing with such strength they could barely manage her. That was the last time my mother dared to interfere. Eventually, Tanya was brought to a priest. He placed his hands on her shoulders and began praying. As he did, a deep, guttural voice erupted from her mouth. He asked, "How many of you are in there?" And that voice replied,
7. There are 7 of us inside her.
The priest was horrified. "Why did you enter her?" The voice answered,
She cared for us. She fed us. We're taking her to the underworld.
That's when he realized the truth. The crows weren't just birds. They were spirits. And when she laughed, when her long, wet hair hung down her back, that's when they took their chance. The ghosts warned the priest Tanya would never marry, never have children, and if she tried, tragedy would follow. The priest threatened them. He prayed with power, and in time, they left. Before Tanya went home, he gave her a protective object and warned her, "Never lose this. Never take it off," he said. Years passed. Tanya married. In 2014, she became pregnant but lost the baby. Again in 2018, and once more in 2022. Every time, a miscarriage. In the end, they gave up and adopted a child. But even now, they do not live in peace. I sincerely hope nothing more happens to Tanya, but some things, they never let go. My name is Erica, and this is a true story that happened when I was 23 years old, though I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm 61 now, and this experience still haunts me. My friends and I had decided to escape the city for a weekend of camping, eager to disconnect and enjoy nature. The woods were dense and eerily quiet. The only sounds were the soft murmur of our conversations and the occasional hoot of an owl. As the night deepened, the firelight flickered, and the shadows seemed to slither and twist with a life of their own. We shared great ghost stories, each one more chilling than the last, until an uneasy silence settled over the group. Just as I was about to break the tension with a joke, a faint rustling came from the edge of the clearing.
Did you hear that?
Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. We all froze, straining to listen. The rustling grew louder and closer. It wasn't the sound of an animal or the wind. It was slow, deliberate.
Probably just a raccoon.
Jake muttered, trying to sound brave, but his eyes betrayed him. Before anyone could move, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. But what stopped us cold was its face, or rather, the lack of one. Where its face should have been was a smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin, like stretched wax. We stared in stunned silence, unable to process what we were seeing. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, the faceless being lunged. Chaos erupted. We scrambled to our feet, the firelight casting frantic shadows across our panicked faces.
Run!
I screamed, grabbing Sarah's hand and dragging her toward the forest. We bolted through the underbrush, branches clawing at our skin. Behind us, the faceless creature moved with unnatural speed, its limbs snapping forward like spider legs. We stumbled into a clearing, hearts racing. Jake and Tom were gone.
We have to find them.
Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with fear. Then came a scream, high, sharp, and full of terror. It was Jake. We ran toward the sound, the scream cutting off abruptly, replaced by a wet, sickening noise that made my stomach lurch. We found Jake near a large oak tree. His body was crumpled, blood pooling around him, eyes frozen open in a mask of pure horror. The faceless thing loomed over him, its head tilted as if admiring its work.
Tom? Where's Tom?
Sarah sobbed. I turned, and there he was, another lifeless figure, twisted unnaturally on the forest floor, his face contorted in pain. The being looked at us. We ran again, deeper into the woods, the sound of its pursuit never far behind. My lungs burned, my legs were lead, but I didn't stop. We burst into another clearing, and there it was, a small, crumbling cabin.
There!
I shouted. We sprinted to the door and slammed it shut, barring it with a thick wooden plank. The creature pounded against it, each blow shaking the cabin. Then, silence.
Do you think it's gone?
Sarah whispered.
I don't know.
I said, dread curling in my chest. The silence dragged on, and then the door exploded inward. The faceless being stood in the doorway, head cocked, savoring our fear. It moved toward us, slowly, arms outstretched. We slowly backed up until we pressed ourselves against the far wall. Sarah screamed as it reached for her, its long, bony fingers inches from her face. In a final desperate move, I grabbed a broken piece of wood and struck it. It barely flinched, its empty face turned to me. It reached out and the moment its skin touched mine, everything went black. I woke up the next morning on the forest floor. The cabin was gone. Sarah was gone. Jake, Tom, gone. All that remained was the blood on my clothes and the crushing dread in my chest. To this day, I don't know what that creature was. Maybe it was something not of this earth. Maybe it was never meant to be seen. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? Now, I see a psychiatrist trying to get this thing out of my head. But sometimes I still wake up gasping from nightmares, hearing that inhuman scream. I think about Jake and Tom every day. I wonder, would they have families now if that night never happened? I just want young people to be careful. You never know what's out there, because sometimes the woods take more than just your peace and quiet. Sometimes they take everything. This story might not be the scariest you've ever heard, but even now, it still gives me chills. It happened when I was just a kindergartner. My school was a 2-story building, and on this particular day, this happened during recess. My friends and I had just finished eating snacks we'd bought from the canteen, and we ran out to play on the playground. But after a while, we got bored and decided to play hide and seek. It was the last round of the game, and one of my friends suggested we go up the left side stairs of the building to hide. But once we got there, everyone chickened out. They said it was too creepy. But I wasn't scared, so I decided to go up alone. I made my way up the stairs, and at the top, there was just one door. As the seekers started counting down, 10, 9, 8, I turned the doorknob, opened the door inward, and stepped inside. The room was dusty, like it hadn't been touched in years. Chairs were scattered and tipped over, and cobwebs hung in the corners. I sat down in a spot near the door, crouched low, and scanned the room. That's when I noticed it. Red splatters on the walls, dripping. It smelled awful, like something rotting under layers of dust. There was a blackboard at the front of the room, and on it were smudged handprints, streaked in the same red color. It should have been a red flag, but at the time, I thought it was just old paint, so I stayed. A few minutes passed. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Then I heard it, a noise from the closet. A thump, a shift, a rustle. I froze in fear, but I was just a kid. I didn't want to find out what it was, so I just ran out of the room and found my friends. I was happy I'd won the game. They hadn't found me, and soon recess was over. Back in class, one of my friends leaned over and asked me where I had been hiding. She said they had been calling my name over and over, but I never answered. I told her I was hiding upstairs, in that room on the left side of the building. She looked at me like I was crazy. Then she said something that haunted me for a very long time. She said,
"That room's been locked for years."
Apparently, the key was lost a long time ago, and no one ever found it. Everyone who tried that door said it was always locked. So, how did I open it? How did I walk right in without a key? And those noises in the closet? What was inside that room with me? And the handprints? Looking back now, they didn't look like paint. They looked like blood. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm 17 now, but I was 15 when this happened. We had just moved to Siquijor, an island in the Philippines known for its witches and strange, unsettling happenings. My mom had warned me about its reputation, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced. When we arrived, there were only 4 other houses nearby, scattered along a lonely road. We settled in quickly. A few months passed without incident until one night I noticed something very strange. One of our neighbor's dogs was sitting perfectly still in the middle of the road, staring into the darkness to the right. It was midnight, and he looked like he was waiting for something or someone. Every now and then, he would bark into the night, a low, fearful bark. I looked around, expecting to see someone walking down the road, but there was no one. I checked on my own dog, too, curious if he sensed anything unusual, but he was sound asleep, curled up peacefully. Eventually, I brushed it off and went back to bed. A few days went by with nothing, but then one night, it felt like everything changed. I was up late watching K-dramas in my room around 1 or 2 a.m. when I heard a loud scream, a distant, desperate cry for help. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor having a bad dream, but as I sat on my bed, glued to the screen, I felt it. Someone walking outside the house. When I looked toward the window, I noticed the motion sensor light outside kept flickering on and off, but no one was there. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just the wind or a branch blowing past the sensor. But deep down, I felt that something was wrong. Then I heard the voice again, closer this time. It was low, almost a whisper, impossible to tell if it belonged to a man or a woman. Panic crept into my chest. My dog, who had been silent, suddenly began barking. Soft at first, almost confused, like he didn't understand why he was the only one reacting. None of the other dogs in the neighborhood made a sound. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to check on my mom and sister, who were fast asleep in the living room. I thought about waking my mom up, but I knew she would dismiss it and tell me to go back to bed. Instead, I checked the back door to see if my dog was okay. He looked different, stiff, his tail low, ears pinned back, staring into the empty road. I followed his gaze. The road was deserted. There was only a single streetlight barely illuminating the dense darkness beyond. All the neighbors' houses were pitch black, no lights on, no sounds. I was the only one awake, the only one hearing that chilling call for help. I barely slept that night, lying frozen in bed until morning. When the sun finally rose, I realized I must have dozed off at some point. I rushed to find my mom and told her everything. As I finished my story, her face paled. She told me that her aunt had called earlier that morning with devastating news. One of my mom's cousins had passed away that night from a sudden heart attack. The same night, I heard the voice calling for help. My mom believed it was her cousin's spirit, lost, confused, still clinging to life, and that the cries I heard were her soul pleading for help, unable to accept what had happened. Since that night, nothing like that has ever happened again, but I still wonder, what was it that I actually heard that night? Growing up in India, we moved around a lot because of my father's job. At one point, we settled into a new house, a small place with only 2 rooms and a tiny veranda at the back. The veranda connected directly to the road, so anyone walking by could easily access it. Soon after moving in, we hired a housekeeper. At first, everything seemed normal, but after a while, she started acting very strange. One day, my mother went into the bathroom to grab something and caught the housekeeper doing something odd near the toilet. When my mother asked her what she was doing, she quickly said she was cleaning, but my mother was sure that she wasn't. There was something off about her posture, something she couldn't explain. Not long after that, we discovered a creepy drawing on the veranda. It showed 4 black figures, 2 large ones and 2 smaller ones. Clearly, it represented our family, my parents, my sister, and me. My mother, furious and alarmed, grabbed a bucket of water and washed the strange drawing away. But almost immediately after that, random chance injuries and accidents started happening to us. Both my parents caught chickenpox. My sister fell off a swing and got a deep gash across her face, and my leg, as I'm pretty short, got caught in the spokes of a bicycle wheel. We began to grow very suspicious of our housekeeper. We were convinced that the housekeeper was somehow involved. My parents decided to fire her and send her away. But the story doesn't end there. One night, as I was lying in bed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A woman with a long ponytail that looked exactly like the housekeeper's hair poked her head out from the hallway near the living room and just stared at me. I was so terrified that I sprinted to the bedroom without even looking back. A few days later, we found out that the housekeeper's husband had been in an accident and broken his leg. And her children? They were constantly falling sick after she left our home. We wasted no time. We moved out of that horrible house as quickly as we could. After we left, things definitely got better. But even today, I wonder, what exactly did the housekeeper do?
On June 14, 1998, a horrifying tragedy unfolded at a bar in Gangnam, Seoul, South Korea. The establishment, known as Sabai Bar, would soon become the site of an unspeakable nightmare. At approximately 2 a.m., a taxi driver patrolling the streets of Seoul in search of passengers stumbled upon a grotesque scene. Outside the bar, a woman lay sprawled on the pavement, desperately waving her hands. Her upper body was drenched in blood, and she was nude from the waist down. The driver, paralyzed by shock, managed to call the police, relaying the grisly sight before him. Officers were dispatched immediately. The police followed a trail of blood that led down a narrow staircase into the basement bar. A suffocating metallic stench greeted them as they descended. Inside, a vision of horror awaited. The owner of the bar and two of her acquaintances lay lifeless, their bodies butchered. The woman who survived the tragedy, Miss Choi, barely made it out of the bar and is the only witness to the gruesome events that took place. That evening, the owner's sister had been covering her shift at the bar. Around 10 p.m., 3 male patrons entered. They sang lyrical ballads and appeared to be polite customers. However, by midnight, the owner had returned to take over, and that's when the nightmare began. According to survivor Choi, she was drinking alone in a room at the bar that day, when suddenly the bar owner and two of her acquaintances were brought into the room by 3 criminals, tied up with cable ties. The men demanded the owner hand over her gold necklace, and when she refused, they savagely stomped on her and beat her. As she begged for her life, one of them drove a knife into her mouth and tore it brutally up to her ear. The criminals mercilessly hacked the owners and her acquaintances to death with a knife, then shook the bodies' heads to check whether they were dead or alive. Then they left, saying, "They're dead." After that, Miss Choi heard glass breaking and water running outside the room for about 10 minutes, and the criminals apparently fled, saying, "Let's go quickly, there's no time." Choi was stabbed in the neck and side with a knife, but fortunately, the wounds weren't near vital points and she miraculously survived. The criminals turned on the water to destroy all the evidence at the scene, so the floor was flooded with water. And to make it difficult to collect whatever evidence was left, they crushed glass cups and plates and sprinkled them on the floor. They then wiped off the fingerprints left on the furniture with newspaper before running away. The police worked hard to collect fingerprints and other evidence, but they could not find the criminals' fingerprints, and DNA testing was difficult with the technology of the time. Also, it was 1998, so CCTV was not widespread, and it was difficult to find witnesses because the World Cup was held that day, and everyone across the country was watching the soccer game. Choi vividly remembered the motive the criminals had told her. When the criminals threatened her with a knife, she pleaded for her life, saying, "My husband is currently undergoing brain surgery, so he can't work, and I'm barely making ends meet with the daily wages I earn from working at a restaurant." However, at that time, one of the criminals demanded money, saying, "We're in the same situation as you because our company was shut down, and we don't want to be like this either." He actually took $60 in cash, as well as the victim's jewelry and credit cards. Choi later recalled that the knife the criminals used was unusual. It was longer than a regular kitchen knife, and it was white, shiny, and very thin. When the police investigated the knife, they found that it was a knife used to cut nets to rescue oneself when caught in a net while diving. The police said that the knife was one issued to members of the Airborne Special Forces, and its unique feature was that it had serrations on both sides. While the police were investigating this case, they discovered something very unusual. The criminals were already in possession of the tools they would use to commit the murder at the time of the incident. If a murder is committed accidentally or wasn't planned, the murderer usually uses whatever is lying around them as a weapon. But in this case, they committed the crime with weapons they brought with them and tools that had to be prepared. For example, an unplanned murder weapon might be an ashtray, a fire extinguisher, a liquor bottle, or a kitchen knife. Not only had the criminals already prepared a murder weapon, but they also brought cable ties with them. Who would normally carry cable ties into a bar? In the end, the experts concluded that the criminals were not ordinary people, but people who had likely committed murder in the past. Professor Yu Song Ho of the Department of Forensic Medicine stated his opinion that, based on the state of the victims' remains, they seemed to have received professional training in murder. In addition, the police found a rubber thimble on the floor at the crime scene, which the police believed the criminals accidentally dropped. It was found that this rubber thimble is mainly used by workers in factories that manufacture electronics and by workers in bookbinding factories. In other words, this was potential evidence that the criminals may have been workers in electronics or bookbinding factories, but this wasn't enough to identify the culprits. The police created a montage of the criminals and spread it around the country in hopes of catching them or getting some information. But despite their best efforts, this case has remained unsolved for 26 years.
My name is Sarah, and I'm from Bangladesh. This happened when my husband and I went on vacation with some friends. We visited a sea beach to spend the weekend. It was a beautiful place. Since I was newly married, it felt like a honeymoon. We had a great day, full of laughter and sunshine. That night, one of our friends, Jason, threw a party in his suite. He had come with his wife Tina, but earlier that afternoon, he told us that she had gone back to her hometown because her mother was very sick. It felt strange, especially because he didn't seem worried, and he let her travel alone without telling anyone sooner. But we brushed it off and went to his party anyway. There were 5 of us in the suite that night. We talked, played games, and told spooky stories to scare each other. My husband and I were having a great time. Jason, though, was drinking heavily. After a while, we took a break from the games just to sit and chat. That's when it happened. While everyone was talking, I froze. My eyes locked onto something in Jason's bedroom. My husband noticed right away that something was wrong. He leaned toward me and asked if I was okay. I answered as calmly as I could. Yes, I'm fine, even though I wasn't, because I knew what I saw. A few minutes later, after trying to calm myself down, I leaned over and told my husband I wasn't feeling well and wanted to go back to our suite. Some of our friends tried to convince us to stay, saying we wouldn't all be together like this for a very long time. But I gave my husband the look, and thankfully, he got the message. Once we were back in our suite, I began to panic. I told him I hadn't brought him back because I was feeling sick. I brought him back because of what I saw in Jason's bedroom. While we were watching TV in Jason's suite, I had been facing the hallway. There was a dim light on, just enough for me to see into the bedroom. At first, I was just glancing around, but then something caught my eye. Tina. She was sitting on the floor, by the wall in the bedroom. Her eyes were open. She was staring straight at me, not blinking, not moving. At first, it was blurry. Then I remembered my glasses. I had taken them off earlier, so I quickly put them back on. That's when I saw her clearly. She looked frozen, like a statue, but her eyes were locked onto mine. I felt this sharp, icy chill crawl down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to startle anyone or risk making things worse. When I told my husband, he was in total disbelief. He argued with me, reminding me that Jason had told us Tina was out of town. He asked why I hadn't said something sooner. I told him the truth. If I had said something right away, you all might have confronted Jason. And what if he had a weapon? I grabbed his phone and dialed 999. The police arrived quickly. They arrested Jason without incident. None of us could believe it. Jason? Our friend? It didn't make sense. But the truth came out during the investigation. Jason had a drinking problem. Tina had tried to help him for years, but he would become violent. And earlier that night, when she confronted him about drinking again, he snapped. They argued. Tina threatened to leave him, so Jason grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the head. She died instantly, and he just left her there. He partied with us, joked, drank, and all the while, Tina's body was in the next room. Jason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, I still get chills thinking about Tina's frozen eyes staring across the hall, watching us from the other side.